Hello, Dog Nation. I am Brandon Adams, and this is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented by Meriwether and Tharp. We're glad to have you with us today. Glad to be back again after obviously being away yesterday, attending with my family after my wife's mom's funeral yesterday. And so many of you have sent so many kind words, and I just really appreciate that. I don't say that lightly. It is nice to be, a part of a community here, and I feel like I'm a part of it, and I'm thankful that you've helped us make this into a real community. It's not just me shouting into a microphone. This is this is a relationship that we formed over the course of years. I'm certainly appreciative of that, and also glad to be back in the saddle again today. As I said, Terence is here today. Off the top, a little bit of quarterback stuff. Kind of an interesting update from UGA spring practice that's worth your attention here today. We'll kind of we'll make fun of what I think is sort of an odd situation at Alabama. And SEC quarterbacks also said something pretty volatile here that at least worth some of our attention there as well. We've actually got pretty fully loaded shows the next couple of days just because we're kind of getting to that time of year where there's sort of a lot going on. So what do you say we don't waste any more time and get it started as DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented by Meriwether and Tharp, begins right now.
Today's episode of DawgNation Daily is brought to you by Meriwether and Tharp, your source for Georgia divorce. Find them online at theatlantadivorceteam.com.
Presented by DawgNation.com. This is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans. Here's your host, Brandon Adams.
It is so good to be back today doing DawgNation Daily, presented by Meriwether and Tharp today after a rare day of no show yesterday. Nice to be back in the saddle again here today. And what do you say? Since we weren't here yesterday, we kind of hit off the top of the show the topic that everybody seems to be discussing right now. That is what's going to come next for Georgia at the quarterback situation, with Stetson Bennett no longer part of the program, with a big competition ongoing during Georgia spring practice where you got Carson Beck and Brock Vandegrift. We've been kind of told those are the two guys kind of sharing some number one reps right now, but Gunnar Stockton is also in this competition, and he shouldn't be counted out. Now, it just so happens we have a new, fresh set of insight on this quarterback competition from Georgia coach Kirby Smart today. Smart spoke this week at, I guess it's the Macon Touchdown Club down there in central Georgia and middle Georgia, I guess they like to call it. And he was, there. It's kind of an awards banquet type thing, but he also showed up there, kind of spoke, took some questions there at the end. Our friends over at the Central Georgia Sports Report put out a nice YouTube video of this, and I'll put a link to this because it's about 30 minutes long. Good speech. We may talk later on in the week about some of the other stuff that Smart said there, but good speech, Q&A there at the end. They did a good job videoing this. I want to give them some pub for that, so I'll put a link to their video when we post the show later on at DawgNation.com and across all the platforms. We'll put a link there to all of that there on that, but I'll play a little audio here from me because we have some audio of this there as well, which is Kirby Smart on the topic of the quarterback position. Hey, what do you want to see from these guys here this year? And Kirby Smart, as he has been doing, and as you assume he would do, kind of keeping those cards a little bit close to the vest. This is what Kirby Smart said about quarterbacks this week down in Macon.
The expectation for the spring is to have a really good competition, to grow those guys, develop all three of them. We don't know which one will be the starting quarterback. We don't know how to play out. We're not looking to find a starter on one day of practice. What we're trying to do is get those three guys better. Make sure they understand the verbiage. Make sure they understand how the offense, can they operate the offense and get the ball to the playmakers and make some plays themselves. We're not like trying to reinvent it. We got good players. We want to get the ball to them. We want to play good, sound defense and offense and play with some good special teams. But I don't think we're going to overdo the quarterback thing in the spring. We're going to sit there and let those guys develop. And they all need reps, and they all need game reps, and we can't get enough of that.
So obviously, I think we all could have pretty much anticipated that Smart would have said something like that. We'll say something like that again, has said things like that before. If you follow this kind of stuff closely, it's almost like you could write this script for Kirby Smart on what he's going to say about the quarterback situation. So, he's not going to reveal necessarily too much on that. So I was kind of thinking, I wonder what other coaches are saying right now about their own quarterback situation, because it just so happens that, three or so teams that we kind of think of as perennial national championship contenders, Georgia obviously, Alabama too, also Ohio State, they've also got their own quarterback competitions going on right now there as well. And I was just kind of curious Kirby Smart has so far been as you assumed he would be when it comes to discussing his quarterback situation. What's Ryan Day saying up there in Columbus? What is Nick Saban saying over there in Tuscaloosa? And you'd probably not be surprised to know that a lot of what those guys, Day and Saban, are saying is very similar to what Kirby Smart is saying right here. In fact, the other day, Ryan Day just came out and said, when he was asked kind of compare his quarterbacks, he said nothing good is going to come out of me saying anything like that, essentially acknowledging that he was choosing to say nothing as it relates to that. But Ryan Day, who I don't mind telling you I don't like, did say something that I did think was kind of interesting. And this is one of those things that is not just a characteristic for his quarterback competition in Ohio State. I think in a roundabout way, this probably works pretty well as a measuring stick for all quarterback competitions. He was asked, okay, well, you don't want to compare your quarterbacks necessarily, but what are you looking for from quarterback in general? He mentioned two things. He says, hey, I want a guy that wants to be competitive, and we can all understand that. But then he used a phrase that I think is really, really good. He says, I want a dominant trait. I want a quarterback that's got a dominant trait. I want something about my quarterback to stand out from everybody else. I want something about my quarterback to put him out in front of the other guys. And I think that's really interesting. Now, Kirby Smart didn't say that about his quarterback competition, but would you agree with me that it's probably fair to assume that he might be viewing this in somewhat the similar way of, hey, Brock Vandagriff's here, Carson Beck's here. What is it about this guy that causes him to stand out from the rest? Smart didn't say that in the clip we just played, but it's safe to assume that that might be one of those things that could sway him or sway Mike Bobo in this ongoing quarterback competition of which guy shows a dominant trait, an aspect to his game that causes him to pull out in front of the other guy. Now, with that said, if we are in the midst right now of trying to figure out between Beck and Vandagriff and also Gunnar Stockton there as well, which of these guys sort of has that dominant trait, I want to tell you something. In our attempt to read into this, in our attempt to do analysis that probably borders on overanalyzing, I think some of us are making a little bit of a mistake. Now, the mistake here is not coming from like local inside the bubble of DawgNation, I don't think, because all of us, for the most part, are pretty plugged into all this. You know, me as the host, all of us as Georgia fans. I think we have a decent handle on the situation with this Georgia team because we are so close to it. But kind of the farther you get outside the bubble of DawgNation, I think you get a little bit of a misunderstanding here. And I think there's an attempt by some of the national media, and that's not like, it's not misinformation. You know, people aren't trying to intentionally mislead you. I just think they have misunderstood what's going on at Georgia. And there's this attempt, I believe, to kind of shoehorn one guy having a trait that the other guy doesn't have as a way of creating a narrative around this quarterback competition that doesn't necessarily exist. Let me show you an example of this. There was a story at CBS Sports the other day as it relates to the various quarterback competitions around college football. And I like pieces like this because I like to follow college football around the entire country. Basically like sort of snapshot capsules of what's happening at Texas with Quinn Ewers and Arch Manning, what's happening in Alabama with Jalen Milroe and Ty Simpson, what's happening in all these different places. But the writer, Chip Patterson, who's a guy that, typically speaking, I've liked. We've had him on the show several times over the course of the years. I've got no beef with Chip Patterson. But I do believe that his synopsis at CBSSports.com from a national perspective looking at the Georgia quarterback situation is completely wrong. And I think understanding why this is wrong, I think helps us all understand what is playing out in actuality here at UGA. So let me read this to you for a minute. Chip Patterson, CBSSports.com, a guy that I like, saying about the Georgia quarterback situation, what's going to be interesting to watch is how the quarterback decision at Georgia might indicate what Mike Bobo wants to do with the Bulldogs offense in 2023. And here's the division he draws between Carson Beck and Brock Vandagriff. Chip says that Carson Beck's got an experience edge, and he's been pigeonholed, perhaps unfairly, as more of the downfield passing option, while Vandagriff has a more impressive recruiting profile as one of the top quarterbacks in the 2021 cycle, in part because of his athleticism and his ability to make plays on the run. That's Chip Patterson, CBSSports.com. Now, I would ask you, do you spot the thing in that synopsis from Chip Patterson that I believe is factually incorrect? I hope that you do, because if you followed the career of Brock Vandagriff, especially going back to his time in high school at Prince Avenue Christian, where he was an outstanding player, working there in the Prince Avenue system, I think you would say that Brock Vandagriff was not a run-first quarterback. Is he athletic? Of course he is. But Brock Vandagriff, during his time in high school, he was clearly a throw-first quarterback who also had really good athleticism. Is it fair to say that Vandagriff may be the best of the three athletes when it comes to the Georgia quarterback situation? That might be. I'm sure both other guys would kind of argue with that. But clearly there is a level of athleticism to Brock Vandagriff that's very impressive. But to say that he's the running option in the comparison between Vandagriff and Beck, I think that's wrong. I think that's trying to find a trait in Vandagriff that separates him from Beck that probably does not exist. I think that, while they kind of look different physically a little bit, I think both these guys, Beck and Vandagriff, and to a certain extent Gunnar Stockton there as well, all kind of want to play the game the same way. They want to make the big throw when it's there, and if it's not there right away, they want to use their athleticism to help aid them. In that particular case, I don't think that Vandagriff is all that different from Carson Beck in that regard, other than the fact that Vandagriff truly might be just a slightly better athlete. That might be an example of a dominant trait that he wants to put on display. But to say that he's more run than pass, I think is misunderstanding what Brock Vandagriff was in high school, which kind of goes back to the original statement that Ryan Day made. Okay, well, if that's not the dominant trait that can emerge here, then what really is the dominant trait that might be the separator when it comes to this quarterback situation? Well, the deeper we get into the spring, the assumption I'm making, and I'll admit this is an assumption, so don't take this as a report, but the assumption as I'm making is right now the thing that separates one from the other might be the fact that Carson Beck, who's got plenty of talent, has also just been here a little bit longer. And it seems like right now the experience that Beck has, that Beck might be using that pretty effectively as a weapon right now in this competition. The fact that he's comfortable in Athens, he's comfortable in an offensive system that may be slightly different than the new coordinator, but still generally what Georgia has been. And part of the reason why I feel comfortable telling that to you right now is because of something another former Georgia quarterback, Jake Fromm, said on our show just the other day, that right now when he looks at this competition, he does see Carson Beck as kind of the clear favorite. This is what Jake said on our show just the other day.
I do believe it is Carson's to lose, and I think that they've seen some great things from him. I mean, he has unbelievable arm talent, and I think for him it's just developing as a leader, just finding that flow of the game, finding that rhythm with the offense, and really just getting experience and taking reps. But I do believe it is his to lose.
One of the reasons why I've grown to love Jake Fromm on our show on Tuesday so much is because of statements like that. It's candid, it's direct, it's to the point, clear, easy to understand from a guy who's been in this situation as Georgia quarterback. Jake Fromm right there speaking very clearly on the Georgia quarterback situation, that because Beck's been here, because he's got talent in his own right, that right now the guy who was number 2 a year ago may be in the best position to move up to number 1. Conventional wisdom makes that easy to understand. And right now, according to some of the chatter, maybe conventional wisdom might truly play out here for UGA. And I guess to kind of wrap up this conversation, that sort of leads me to a different point, which is I told you earlier that Ryan Day had said what he said about his own quarterback competition. But I was also kind of paying attention to some about what Nick Saban was saying about his battle with a guy like, say, Ty Simpson against a guy like Jalen Milroe. Milroe, a little bit like what Carson Beck is, and the fact that Milroe's at least played some. I guess Milroe at Alabama's probably played more than Beck here as a Georgia, but he has some experience. Simpson's a guy that's played far less, but Simpson's a guy that's also, thought to be at Alabama, really talented in his own right. And one of the things that Saban had said the other day about Ty Simpson is, hey, Simpson had really developed well, that he had really grown and matured in a way that I think was kind of closing the gap that Milroe might have because of the experience edge that he has in that. And so I think that might kind of be the next question for Kirby Smart in all of this, which is if we take Jake Fromm at his word, I think that Jake Fromm is a pretty wise guy on this, and I think he does have some insight, that it is Carson Beck's competition to lose because of the experience edge that he has, the fact that he was the number 2 quarterback a year ago. Then how much has Brock Vandagriff's development allowed him to close the gap on that? How much has Gunnar Stockton's development allowed him to close the gap on that? Because ultimately that may be what's at stake here, that a guy who played well enough during practice last year to emerge as number 2 may be closer to take that step towards emerging to be number 1. But is Brock Vandagriff taking advantage of his time to close that gap? Is he developing the way that Saban says Ty Simpson, a quarterback at Alabama, is developing right now? Is Gunnar Stockton making that push there too? Those may be some of the unanswered questions that we still have to learn here. And the good news is, while we don't see a ton of Georgia practice, and some of what we hear about this is all rumor mill, coming up on April 15th, G-Day, we'll get to see this with our own eyes. A quarterback competition that I think has been fun for everybody so far. We'll get a chance to see how this resolves itself as we head towards the end of the spring. My name's Brandon Adams, and this is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented today by Meriwether and Tharp. Glad to be back with you here doing the show again today, and happy to have all of you with us, no matter how you get to us on video. We'll start at 9:45, 1st and 15, DawgNation.com, DawgNation app, 10 a.m. after that across all video platforms, Facebook, YouTube, Twitter, Twitch. We're on the radio at noon every single day on App Sports Radio 960 The Ref, and we are available as a podcast wherever you find them. Apple, Spotify, worldfamousdognation.com. We just try to make the show as available as we possibly can. And we're certainly so thankful that so many of you have found a platform that works for you, whichever one it is. We're relatively platform agnostic around here. We just sort of want it to be out there, be available, and you guys can find it however you can. And we're certainly appreciative of the fact that you do. And we couldn't do everything that we do if not for great sponsors, like our friends at Meriwether and Tharp, who bring today's show for you there too. But not only does Meriwether and Tharp help serve us in a situation like this by partnering with us and helping us deliver the show each and every week, they also want to serve you there as well. And for them, it truly is an act of service. Meriwether and Tharp is a very generous company when it comes to helping you in one of the most challenging situations you might deal with, your own divorce situation. That's what you find yourself going through. And one of the reasons why I always have so much confidence and so much peace of mind about recommending Meriwether and Tharp to those of you who might find yourself in a divorce situation is because I see the way in which Meriwether and Tharp gives to its clients, but actually even gives to people who aren't yet their clients. Because if you go to their website, which is theatlantadivorceteam.com, that's theatlantadivorceteam.com, you really will see why Meriwether and Tharp is your source for Georgia divorce. What I mean by that is there are all kinds of free resources that Meriwether and Tharp doesn't get a dime for, but they will give you what could be potentially invaluable to you, which is insight into the divorce situation. You can read blog posts, you can listen to podcasts, and you can really educate yourself here. And I think what that education can be best used for is to make sure you know how to ask the best possible questions when it comes to that free initial consultation with one of Meriwether and Tharp's attorneys. This is what I love about the relationship that Meriwether and Tharp wants to have with you if you are in a divorce situation, that so much of what they provide is free, no pressure, at your leisure, at your comfort. And then after that, you choose to take that next step and hire Meriwether and Tharp to handle your divorce situation. So please, find them online, theatlantadivorceteam.com. That is theatlantadivorceteam.com. Meriwether and Tharp is your source for Georgia divorce. All right, we're going to get Terence Edwards here coming up in a minute, the great former Georgia wide receiver, on hand for us today. Always a fun conversation to be able to have with him. Prior to that, I want to give you a little bit of an update from Georgia practice here the other day, where media folks got a chance to see this. And once again, I'll be self-serving here and tell you that if you'll go to DawgNation.com, we have some kind of new technology on the website, which is kind of cool, that if you look at like the practice report as it was published the other day at DawgNation.com, not only do you get a very thorough and descriptive written report from Connor Riley, inside the story, if you kind of look up there at the top in the business, we call it the featured image, like the big box, the picture there at the top, it's actually a slideshow that, a gallery, I guess the better way. It's not a slideshow. That has a negative connotation in the website world. This is more of a gallery type thing where, easy technology. You can just, literally kind of, swipe to the left, which some of y'all have a lot of experience doing, and just keep swiping. You can see all kinds of pictures from the Georgia practice. Good collection of photos from that day's practice that media got a chance to see. So if you want to feel like you're there, I really do feel like DawgNation.com is doing a great job of making you feel that way here right now, and some really great new technology on the website is helping us do that. I just think the DawgNation's been looking awesome as of late. I'm not a huge part of the writing on the website necessarily, but I do obviously love our site, and I think it's gotten even better. And I think that Connor Riley's practice reports oftentimes some of the best stuff that we have. Well, after all of that, sales pitch, whatever else, the point is the other day at DawgNation.com, very good practice report, handful of nuggets. One thing in particular I want to point out to you here, which is maybe something I was guilty of doing. Now, you can make a list of the things I've been wrong about over the years. It's going to be as long as my arm, of course. But, prior to the start of spring practice, I think a lot of us were saying, hey, rubber stamp it. Amarius Mims is one of your starters at offensive tackle. Ernest Green's that guy at the other side. Really nobody else to push Ernest Green right now. This one belongs to Green. If he's healthy, he's going to be the guy. Now, listen. Ernest Green may still be the guy at offensive tackle because obviously he is an incredible talent and someone that I think everybody would say has a very bright future at UGA. But you also know this, at a place like Georgia, there is nothing given to you for free, and everything is going to be earned. And right now it sounds like Green, who's a big-time talent, is in a big-time fight for a starting position here at UGA. And that coveted playing time that everybody wants, it sounds like that's a battle right now along the offensive line. Connor Riley had a blurb to that effect at DawgNation.com. Let me read this to you here for a minute as it relates to the Georgia offensive line situation. Connor reporting that Austin Blaske is actually getting the first-team reps right now at left tackle, at least based on the time that Meady got to see the other day. He says Amarius Mims was at right tackle, Cedric Von Prawn is at center, and Tate Ratledge, Xavier Truss are the guard spots there. I guess Ratledge on the right side, Truss there on the left side, if I'm reading that correctly. But that was your situation. And the part of that from Connor Riley at DawgNation that may stand as a little bit of a surprise is Blaske ahead of Green. Now, how much of this is Green working his way back from an injury situation that obviously took him off the field last year? How much of this is Blaske just being a big-time competitor and a tough guy to keep off the field? Maybe it's a little bit of a combination of all of this. If you go back and listen to Tuesday's show, I talked to Connor about some of this. This is actually prior to this practice report viewing opportunity that Connor and the rest of the DawgNation folks got the other day. But Connor pretty directly said on Tuesday that if Georgia played a game today, which obviously it does not, but if Georgia played a game today, he says it would be Blaske and not Green who would be the starter there at that particular spot. So let me tell you how I think you ought to interpret all of this. I think if you're a Georgia fan, I think you got to view this as nothing but good news. Because I'll tell you, and you've probably heard me say this before, that I think in a roundabout way, you probably felt pretty good about what you assumed the Georgia offensive tackles were going to be, even if you kind of take Austin Blaske out of this. And, we probably weren't giving Blaske a ton of attention prior to the start of spring practice, and that may be our error, but that's just the way it was. We weren't giving him a ton of attention. But if we were to assume back prior to the start of spring practice, it's Green here on this side, it's Mims here on that side, boy, you feel really, really good about your starters because those are two big-time talents that you got on both sides there. But the other thing we also said was, my gosh, what kind of tackle depth do you have at that point in time? This sort of feels like a little bit of a thinner situation in terms of backup tackle scenario than maybe we're used to seeing at Georgia. And we said that means a guy like Monroe Freeling stepping in as a true freshman, man, his development's going to be crucial because you may need that guy to be a tackle ready to go into a game if we assume our presumed starters, Mims or Green, were to get hurt. Well, all of a sudden now, you have now added another player into this mix. So if Blaske wins the job, that means he beat out a talent to the degree of Ernest Green to do so. That means Blaske's probably a pretty good player. Or if Green gets healthier and he emerges, and maybe he eventually, over the course of a competition that may go into the season, if he were to emerge, all of a sudden Blaske kept it close enough that you also apparently feel pretty good about playing Austin Blaske there as well. And then that's sort of a poof, voila type thing where, hey, actually maybe the overall offensive tackle depth is a little bit better than I thought it was if you had a competition this intense taking place there on that left side. Amarius Mims is the right tackle. I'm sure he'll be a little bit like Warren McClendon. You may not hear a word about that side of the field all year long because McClendon sort of had it on lock. Maybe Mims does there as well. He may be one of the best players in the entire country this year. A little bit of a mystery opposite Mims, though, and it sounds like we used the word fun competition earlier to describe quarterback. Sounds like Blaske Green's kind of a fun competition. And a guy like Austin Blaske, who for shows like this that probably at times get a little too obsessed with the recruiting rankings this and star rating that, Austin Blaske flies underneath our radar, but he's performing such a way at practice, he says, hey, you better step up and notice me because you're making a fool of yourself if you're not paying attention to what I'm doing. So nothing but credit to him for that. And we'll continue to watch how this goes and obviously read more about this, of course, at DawgNation.com there as well. So that is Around the Doghouse. This is DawgNation Daily, presented by Meriwether and Tharp. Before we're done, we're going to make a little bit of fun of Nick Saban today because I feel like Saban's kind of caught himself in a situation where he's having to maybe backtrack on his words just a little bit. Also, pretty volatile statement from an SEC quarterback that's at least worth some of our time there as well. And Kirby Smart has shared some insight into pretty hot topic as it relates to the rest of the SEC here right now. Sounds like he's kind of on board. So we'll cover all of that before we're said and done. Oh, yeah, by the way, a couple of special visitors at Georgia practice this weekend. I'm not talking about Jeff Collins in this particular case. We're going to do more of this on Friday, but I'll do some of this to close out our show here today. So we are very, very busy before we wrap things up here today. But for now, you love his insight on Thursday. Always such a great commenter on the things happening around the Georgia program. It's the former Georgia wide receiver. It is Terence Edwards here today on DawgNation Daily, presented by Meriwether and Tharp.
From Athens and across the SEC or wherever the recruiting trail may lead, here's a DawgNation.com insider.
Let me bring Terence Edwards into this conversation. Great former Georgia wide receiver. We love his insight on days like this. And Terence, if you don't mind, let me also pick up on the quarterback thing that I was talking about a moment ago. you obviously spent a lot of time around the high school game, and I think there's an error on some of the national media. It's almost like they're trying to turn like Brock Vandagriff into Lamar Jackson or Michael Vick and sort of make him, kind of almost like a run-first style quarterback. If you saw him in high school, I believe he was clearly, a pass-first quarterback who had the ability to also use his leg. So I realize that everything needs a narrative, but the narrative that Beck's your throw or Vandagriff's your runner, and that is, kind of how you decide to divide up this offense. I don't quite think it works out that way necessarily in terms of how these two guys kind of divide themselves from a trait standpoint. Would you agree with that, knowing what you know about all these guys?
Oh, I most definitely agree with that. I think Stetson was the most athletic quarterback in that room, so I don't think Brock is near as straight line fast as him. I don't think Brock is as shifty as Stetson was or is. So I don't see that narrative of Brock being Michael Vick or he's been a guy that is a run-first quarterback. I think he's able to move the chains with his legs if need be. He's bigger than Stetson, so I think he's able to take some of the pounding if he's get into his mind that he's going to take off and run. I've always said I don't need a quarterback that's going to be able to take it 60. That's lovely. Love having Lamar Jackson type speed is something that's a plus. But can you get me 8 yards when it's 3rd and 7 scrambling? That's what I'm looking for in a quarterback in this day and age. And I think Brock is that type of quarterback that he will be able to scramble and get us first down with his legs. But him just being able to stand in the pocket and throw the football, that's what he's known for, not his running ability.
So let me ask you this. The other day, Jake Fromm on the show said he thought the quarterback competitions, the phrase he used was Carson Beck's to lose. In other words, that Beck is the favorite, and if Beck doesn't falter, he'll be the starting quarterback. Would you agree with that characterization based on, I guess, what you think should be true, but also what you assume might be true at Georgia right now?
I assume that to be true as well. I think this job is Carson Beck's to lose. I think he was next in line. He should get the first opportunity to showcase his skill set. Now, if he doesn't capitalize on this opportunity, that is on him. So I think he will get the first shot at being the starting quarterback, and unless Brock Vandagriff just blows it away, I personally believe that Carson will start game one. Now, it's up to him to finish that game, because you think about a few years ago, who started game one? It wasn't Stetson.
That's right.
It was
JT.
What was his name? No, he ended up going to Temple.
Oh yeah, DeJuan Mathis 2020. That's right.
DeJuan Mathis.
Yeah.
Started the season off right that first game, and he didn't capitalize, and Stetson was able to come in, and the rest is history. So who starts that game one is not necessarily who's going to finish the season, but it is, I believe, just like Jake Fromm believes, that it's Carson Beck's job to lose.
Yeah, you bring up a really good point. I mean, I think if I'm counting right, there have been 4 instances in which the game one starter wasn't the season-long starter for UGA. You talk about, DeJuan in 2020 giving way to Stetson. JT in 2021 also gave way to Stetson. Jacob Eason got hurt in 2017. Jake Fromm took over. But even 2016, people may forget, Grayson Lambert actually started the first game against North Carolina that year, and Jacob Eason eventually took over before the year was done. So, maybe that's the pathway here if you're a Vandagriff or a Stockton, is to say, I may not be able to overtake Beck right now, but history shows that eventually I may get my opportunity, because, these kinds of things have kind of changed during seasons in the past.
Right, correct. So there's an old saying in football that you're only one player away. So you never know what's going to happen. Jake Eason get hurt, and Jake Fromm took over, and the rest is history. So those guys, I think that will do a great job of being ready and willing to do whatever the team needs. But you have to prepare yourself as you're going to be the starter each week, because you're always one play away from being a starter from injury, or just like we've seen, and just like you said, the player is not playing up to the standard that was set for him, and they make a change. And once you get your opportunity, you have to capitalize on it. So going into game one, like I said, I believe Carson Beck will be the starter, and Brock and Garner just have to be ready just in case their number is called.
So let me ask you this. If you were advising Brock Vandagriff or you're advising Gunnar Stockton, and they came to you and said, and for the sake of conversation, like I said, they say this is true, is that, hey, right now Beck's kind of ahead of me. What do I do to close the gap? Like, if you're Vandegrift, I mean, clearly you want to win the competition. Even Gunnar Stockton, who's the youngest here, he wants to win the competition. What do you do to close the gap? I mean, obviously you got to practice well, but is there a specific thing you can do to try to, like, diminish the advantage that Beck has by being a talented guy who's also a little bit more experienced? What can the younger quarterbacks do to make a name for themselves right now?
I think it starts in practice. I think a lot of people don't really understand how important practice is. There's a lot of data that goes into practice. So I believe the guys are going to get equal amount of reps. I think all this data is going to be composed to show the true percentages of who's winning into practice, who's doing better. So each day, the backup quarterbacks have to go in there and figure out, what can I do better today? Is that just being a true leader? Is that just being a great teammate? Is that just being able to back up the guy who's in front of me with the same spirit if I was the starter? So that goes a long way. A lot of things that you don't see as a fan that we do see is just body language. Body language goes a long way. You're in practice, and now you're not putting your best effort because you may believe you should be the number one guy, and you're not for whatever reason. We see bad body language, and bad body language is contagious. So you got to come to practice with a smile. You got to come to practice trying to get yourself better and the team better. And that goes a long way. And it's just not numbers. It's everything that goes into it. And bad body language can go a long way of not getting on the field.
We've been doing this show for a long time. Hopefully we don't get everything wrong. But one thing I do think that we occasionally get wrong year after year after year is, Terence, when there's a discussion to be had about somebody stepping into a new starting role, we have a tendency to fixate on the guy that had the higher recruiting ranking. And oftentimes we're proven wrong on that someone of a lesser rank actually proves himself to be a very good player. It's too early to say what's going to happen for Georgia at left tackle, but once again, you got a situation where a guy like Austin Blaskey, who did not necessarily have a lot of recruiting attention around him when he came to UGA, sounds like he's performing pretty well at practice right now, and it sounds like, at least based on some of the reps that have been seen, eyewitness account here, has been kind of getting some look at first-team left tackle here ahead of a guy like Ernest Green, who has been banged up, by the way, but a much higher-rated recruit. These position battles are fun during spring practice. What do you make about the idea of some surprise starters potentially emerging? A guy like Blaskey, to me, if he ends up being the starter at left tackle, even if it's partially due to a Green injury recovery, that'd still kind of count as a surprise. This is one of the fun things about this time of year, isn't it?
Right. And I've seen some stuff on the social media world talking about Austin, and he's ahead of Ernest Green right now. Ernest Green must not be as good as, and I just laugh at that stuff because, like you just said, Ernest is coming off an injury where he didn't really participate as much last year and get the reps that he needs. And Austin has been there and working, and you read all the tea leaves that he is a really mean SOB. So he is a guy that's put in his time. And we all, and I think fans get caught up into someone else's opinion about a player and not really dive deep into a player. So Kirby and staff saw something in this young man that they like to offer him a scholarship. And I just think every guy that if we go and say he shouldn't be at Georgia, let's look at Javon Bullock. When he came out, he's from my area. I'm from Sandersville. He's from Millersville. So I've known the kid. I've heard about the kid for a long time. And when we signed him, you can see the grumbling within the Georgia fan base. Why do we waste another scholarship, blah, blah, blah. Now look how this guy's turned out. One of the best players, MVP on the defense, and guy that is just a football player. So we just got to wait and see a lot of times of how is it going to shake out, because recruiting rankings is, yes, you have some guys that do this for a living, but you cannot determine someone's heart into this. There's a guy that may have the skill, may have the look, may have everything that you're looking for, but these recruiting rankings does not determine how much how much heart you have. So I just wait and see. And I know Kirby and Company is going to play the best player. It doesn't matter if somebody came in with the hype. They're going to play the best player because they want to win games. So I just think when, it's fun and we love doing the National Signing Day thing and praising about recruiting classes, and it does help. I'm not saying that, because you look at the teams that are on top, they normally have signed a better player. But there's some guys that it's not rated as high, but are dang good football players. And from what I'm reading, he's one of them. And I'm a Javon Bullock fan. He's another one of those guys that was a low-rated kid, now one of the better players on the team.
No, I think that's really interesting. There's been some chatter here as of late. I think some of this goes back to something that Brock Bowers said to the media the other day about how the Georgia offense could look a little bit different here this year. And some of this is just straight personnel related. The fact that Darnell Washington isn't here anymore, and Washington was such a catalyst for what Georgia did as a second tight end on the field last year. But a guy like Dominic Lovett, who wasn't here last year, now he is here, and he had darn near 900 receiving yards last year. That's a guy you want to use and probably use him as a slot. That, well, if you got the slot receiver in the game, that means there's not really room for that second tight end. So maybe you see less of the two tight end sets and more of the three wide receiver sets, and that becomes a little bit more of a common look for Georgia, whereas, Georgia's obviously enjoyed playing those two tight end sets. Not to get too, X's and O's football-y here, but, what do you think about the idea that, hey, maybe because of the fact that receivers are a little bit deeper and slot receivers are guys that you might really be able to weaponize this year, that there may not be as much room for the two tight end stuff here this year? Terence, what do you make of that potential scenario for Georgia right now?
I honestly, I just think it's Darnell was a very unique football player. And even if Todd Monken was still the offensive coordinator, you can't replace Darnell Washington. And I know Brock is a generational talent. He's going to go down as one of the best players in Georgia history. But I've said this over and over and over. We may not see it for its production standpoint, but Darnell Washington was just as valuable as Brock Bowers in his own way.
Yeah.
So I think losing a talent like Darnell was possibly going to show more 11 personnel, that's three receivers, one tight end, more than 12 personnel that we generally stayed in because of Darnell's unique ability to block, catch, and run. And I've been hearing so much buzz about Dominic Lovett. It's crazy. I will be in Athens today for the coaches clinic, so I'm able to see this young man in person. But from what I've been reading, he's been probably the best receiver in practice so far. So I think the offense is going to change a little bit because of personnel. And we bring in, and we have Bobo, who's been a successful offense coordinator. Everybody always talk about, and it's fun to me to talk about, we're going to go back to running toss sweep. Well, Aaron Murray is the all-time leading passer in Georgia history, and Bobo was his offense coordinator for 4 years. So I don't get this narrative of Bobo wasn't a kind of a pass-first guy when you got a quarterback that was 13,000 yards in the SEC. So I think Bobo is we are going to continue using the same playbook, but Bobo is his own man, so he's going to bring in his own wrinkles there, here and there. So I just think personnel-wise it's going to look different because we're losing a player that is irreplaceable, in my opinion. That's in Darnell Washington.
So let me finish with this then, because I think you bring up a lot of really good points, which is, okay, so if you are going to play more three receiver sets, and it's easy to understand why Georgia would, because you want a lot of these guys in the field, how do you go to that? Obviously, no more Darnell Washington around here. How do you go to that without losing something in your running game? And how do you manage your offense so that, hey, you're not tipping off your play call? Because if you are bringing that second tight end, well, maybe that's more likely to be a running play. And if you've got the three receiver set, and that's more likely to be, a passing play. How do you manage the running game with this potential decision with personnel about when you go slot, when you go second tight end?
I think we're still going to stay in 12 personnel. We didn't recruit these tight ends not to continue to be in a lot of 12. We just don't have a Darnell. Oscar Delp is going to be fantastic. A guy that I've worked with, a little bit better route runner, probably a little bit more vertical stretch than Darnell. But you can't replace 6'7", 280. I think the closest blocker, and people need to continue to go watch his film, the blocker that is probably one of the better blocking tight ends right now is Lawson Lucky, who was asked to block a lot at Norcross. So he's probably going to get some opportunity there. But the tight end room is just going to be a little bit different now. I think we're still going to have to do the 12 personnel, and those guys are going to have to block. I don't want Brock down the blocking. I'd rather have the other tight ends down the blocking, and they'll have their chance next year after Brock leaves that they get to be the Brock Bowers. But we got to have those tight ends to get in there and be able to block in the run game. That's been our identity. the 12 personnel more than anyone. I think we're going to continue that because we have recruited so well at the tight end position. But the group is different. We have a bunch of Travis Kelces, in my opinion, in the room now that's able to stretch the field with their route running, catching ability, and speed for that position. So I think we're still going to employ the 12 personnel, but I just think having 11 personnel out there right now, we're just going to have to get it done in the run game or RPO game. Depends on the numbers in the box. We have recruited very well on offensive line, so we're going to have to be able to move people with the front without having Darnell. But it's just going to be different, but I still think it's going to be productive.
Well, speaking of guys that you've worked with, I believe you've worked with Pierce Sperling before, too. So if you talk to him, please pass along to him. We're wishing him well as he recovers from injury. I know he got a little bit banged up the other day, so we'll wish him well on that. And, of course, Terence, lots of guys that you work with. This is the time of year when that takes place. So if folks want to be a part of the Terence Edwards Wide Receiver Academy, and we just talked about tight ends, but the TE Wide Receiver Academy stands for Terence Edwards here. We'll make sure we're clear on that. How can folks get in touch with you and the great work you're doing getting folks ready for the upcoming season here right now?
Well, you can find me on all social media platforms at Terence Edwards Wide Receiver Academy.
Terence, great stuff. Look forward to talking to you next time, and maybe we'll see if we can get some insight from you in what you see from Athens here today there as well. Good stuff there from Terence Edwards.
Let's take a look around the rest of the league. This is SEC Through.
Yeah, Terence said he was going to that coaching clinic today. You better believe we'll be peppering him with questions after that's all said and done. He also said one more thing about Austin Blask I think is really interesting. He used the word mean to describe him. You know, listen, this is an oversimplification, but I think this may be kind of true. It's like, hey, if you've got close battles for position at any spot on the field, offensive line, defensive secondary, any position on the field, you know, if you put the 11 meanest guys out there on either side of the ball, that's usually a pretty good way to go about your business. And so that might be one of the differentiating factors for a guy like Blaski right now. One of the reasons why he's earning some of the credit that he's earning. I tell you what's not mean, though. That's the chance to go cruise around the SEC courtesy of Royal Caribbean, the chance to be on a Royal Caribbean cruise ship. For us here at DawgNation, we're getting excited about our own DawgNation cruise coming up April 24th to 28th. It's almost here. And as you hear us talk about that, get excited about that, you need to do like so many of our folks in our audience have done. They've shared photos with us, and sometimes we've shared those with you. You need to go ahead and get planned up on your own Royal Caribbean cruise vacation. Springtime travel, heading towards the summer, kind of the best time of the year in a lot of ways. Be out there on one of those Royal Caribbean cruise ships or starting to think about late 2023. Oftentimes you get great savings on some of those fall sailings and things like that. Or do you want to start thinking about January 2024 when Icon of the Seas debuts for the very first time? Whatever cruise itinerary suits you, the 3-night sailing, the 4-night sailing, the full 7-night sailing, going to destinations all across the Caribbean, including the Bahamas and including Perfect Day, Coco Cay. Whatever your choice is, a Royal Caribbean cruise vacation is out there for you. And a great travel agent like Jessica Slater can do it. By the way, our own Kaylee Manziel, she was on a Royal Caribbean cruise vacation just the other day. She can tell you how much fun that was. So talk to Jessica. She can help you. Give her a call, 770-718-9147. 770-718-9147. Jessica Slater, travel agent specially selected for us by Royal Caribbean to help you get the most out of your Royal Caribbean cruise vacation. With that said, let's go cruising around the SEC now, courtesy of Royal Caribbean. And we don't talk politics here on this show for obvious reasons, but there's a phrase oftentimes used in politics I want to use with you right now. You know when the politician sort of says something they don't mean or says something they wish they didn't say, which is, I guess, more true often than the other part of this. You have to go back and kind of clean up the mess that you made and sort of pretend you didn't say the other thing and you said this. In politics, oftentimes that's called walking something back. Hey, I said this. Maybe now people don't really like what I said, so now I got to pretend I didn't say it. So I'm going to walk this back and try to put the toothpaste back in the tube. I believe we have a little bit of an example of that, I think, from Alabama coach Nick Saban. Now, he would never admit this, but I believe that's kind of what's going on here. You'll remember the other day that Nick Saban, upon suspending his defensive back Tony Mitchell for, whatever was going on there, Saban said there's no such thing as being in the wrong place at the wrong time. That was taken by most to be a shot at Alabama basketball coach Nate Oates, who had said something similar. And then he also, I guess, eventually tried to walk that back as it relates to Brandon Miller and the situation that's gone on there with the basketball team, which by now you're probably also very well aware of, too. Saban has tried to pretend that this was just a misunderstanding, that folks have mischaracterized what he said, that he wasn't attempting to take that shot at the basketball team. I don't necessarily believe that, but that's what Saban kind of tried to put out there through some back channels and things like that. Well, now you've got photographic evidence of Saban and this basketball team being all lovey-dovey, and maybe even with Nate Oates being all lovey-dovey. So whatever was said before, photographic evidence, at least according to Saban here now, that he's all in on this basketball team. Let me show you this. So Saban's out there with Nate Oates. He's shaking hands with everybody. He's having a good time in Alabama basketball practice prior to the start of the Sweet 16 here. And I'll tell you, I think everybody's sort of getting this wrong here. A lot of people are kind of treating this, the whole idea of no such thing as the wrong place, the wrong time. This is some sort of rebuke by Saban against Nate Oates, who they feel like is being too cavalier in his handling of the situation with Miller. To me, look, if this is Saban drawing a hard line on discipline, this would be one of the first times in his career he's ever done that I can remember. Oftentimes Saban's been criticized for the exact opposite. So the fact that Saban's doing this now leads me to believe he must just be jealous of Nate Oates. Oates is winning. Saban right now, at least at the championship level, is not. Pretty soon people sort of forget what you did a few years ago, becomes what have you done for me lately, and right now I'm sure Nate Oates, probably in the eyes of Saban, sort of looks like the toast of Tuscaloosa. What is it, the Rammer Jammer, that little breakfast spot right there next to the stadium? I'm guessing there's a lot more Nate Oates talk right now than there is, at least for right now, Nick Saban talk, because Saban lost 2 games a year ago. So Saban trying to put Oates in his place and then pretend that he didn't. Seems like that may be what went on there. Saban trying to walk that back a little bit. Speaking of volatile comments, South Carolina quarterback Spencer Rattler had some of that, I guess, as well. The Barstool show called, I think it's Bussin' with the Boys, I believe it's called. So they go to Columbia. We talked the other day about what Shane Beamer had to say to the Bussin' with the Boys guys. And so the question was also asked to Spencer Rattler, the quarterback of, I think this actually is a good question. If you get drafted in the first round, do you want folks in Oklahoma to kind of claim you? Do you want them celebrating this as an accomplishment for them? And he said, no, I don't want them to do that. Which I think Rattler's well within his rights to do. He was the Oklahoma starter. They benched him, and he left. The idea that somehow Rattler's supposed to, ultimately and forever pay homage, whatever the word is, to what happened there in Norman, Oklahoma for him. I don't think he should feel like he should have to do that. And if Rattler were to be drafted in the first round, I don't think Oklahoma gets to claim him at all. They put him on the bench, which obviously also circles back to Alabama here too, who tries to claim Jalen Hurts. The worst part of this, though, may be what's going on at Ohio State, where they try to treat Joe Burrow as if he was an Ohio State quarterback. Part of the reason why I don't like that program very much. And I know Joe's from Ohio, and, I guess he did enjoy his time at Ohio State, but he's also playing for the Bengals. He has to say things like that because so many of the Bengals fans are also Ohio State fans. At least it would probably serve him well to do so, and that may be why he does it. But the point is, you've got a lot of programs right now trying to claim guys they didn't have much to do with while they were there, including Ohio State with Joe Burrow, who became great the moment he left Columbus. Not the first person to put a smile on his face by seeing Columbus in the rearview mirror. But the point is, good for Spencer Rattler saying, no, Oklahoma doesn't get to claim me if I go to the first round. The real issue here may be Rattler working his way into a first-round quarterback conversation, something I don't know that he's going to be able to do. But at least he's saying what he said. I also thought there was some interesting comments recently from Greg McElroy in his podcast. He does like one of these ESPN podcast things. We may talk more about this in the time to come. I know we will. About the relationship between Jimbo Fisher and new offensive coordinator Bobby Petrino. This is going to be one of the fun subplots in the SEC here this season, where Fisher is at a point in his career now where he needs to turn the offense over to someone. And you can say what you want to about Bobby Petrino, the person, Bobby Petrino, the man, people have, and almost all of it's true. But Petrino, the coach, is still, I think, a very effective football weapon. And a guy like that, who could be head coach at UNLV, comes to Texas A&M, you assume he comes to have control over the offense. So if Jimbo Fisher won't let him have it, then Fisher deserves to be fired. And he probably will be fired because it's pretty obvious that the Fisher offense, as we saw a year ago, just wasn't working. I know Fisher kind of got a little bit bristly about that at spring practice with the press conference the other day, but the proof is in the pudding. The results are right there on the field, and Fisher's had plenty of chances to resurrect that A&M offense, hasn't been able to do that. So that's why Petrino is here. It'll be interesting to see, to use a phrase that's popular these days, if Jimbo is going to let Petrino cook. It'll be interesting to see if he gets the freedom to do what he wants to do there. If he does, this could be a better A&M offense. Petrino's obviously an effective offensive coach. That'll be a fun subplot in the SEC West here this season, when it's the final year of that division. And, of course, tonight, Sweet 16 action gets back at it again. You got, 3 SEC teams in the mix here between Arkansas and obviously Tennessee and Alabama there as well. We'll be honest here. You can call us a hater if you want to, but we are openly rooting against Alabama. We're running out of teams that give us a legitimate chance, I believe, of besting the number one overall seed. So maybe we kind of hang our hat on UCLA a little bit. Maybe that's where you kind of gravitate towards if you want to see a non-Alabama champion. So we'll see. We'll see how that goes. There's also the potential of like an Alabama-Tennessee third Saturday in October. I think it's Final Four, regional final for those two teams. That could get fun later on. But nonetheless, pretty good SEC flavor here to the Sweet 16 as it gets tipped off again tonight. We'll make that cruising around the SEC, courtesy of Royal Caribbean. Now, earlier, just a moment ago, I mentioned the fact that in the SEC, this is our final year for divisions. In 2024, this league takes on an entirely different look. So as we kind of shift back to Georgia here for a moment on DawgNation Daily, presented by Meriwether and Tharp, let me give you a little bit more from Kirby Smart in Macon this week. He was asked in that Q&A situation about, hey, what about this expanded schedule? What about all of this, your three permanent opponents? There are some coaches, Alabama, Nick Saban, obviously, whining left and right. Some entities were led to believe that Kentucky didn't want 9-game conference schedule. They wanted to stay at 8. They liked that non-conference game, given that chance at bowl eligibility. So some programs have been outspoken about this. Kirby Smart, though, not going down that road. This is what he said this week about what's about to happen with the brand new SEC scheduling model. Take a listen to this.
I have no thoughts on my permanent opponent. It's not my job to pick them, so I'm not going to whine or cry about it. I'm not going to complain. I'm going to take whoever they get us and try to beat them. I think that's the best way to handle it. And the best thing about that is it'll rotate to where you'll get to play everybody in our conference at a faster rate. Everybody talks about us and A&M. We haven't been to A&M the whole time they've been in the conference, and we're finally going soon. But when you go to 9, you turn it over faster. So you get to see everybody, and look, there's somebody a lot smarter than me with algorithms. I sat through a meeting where they told us all the algorithms of how they're going to figure out. And I said, you know what, y'all just let me know who we got. And I'm going to spend my time trying to get the best players and let y'all figure out who we play. Because at the end of the day, you got to beat who you play, right? And they decide that. I don't think there's any partiality that, we're going to give this team an easy schedule and this team a hard schedule. I really don't believe that.
So I think that Smart's last point there is a really important one. We're making a big deal about permanent opponents right now because that's the new thing. That's information that we want to learn and have confirmed for us. But I believe 4 or 5 years in the future, when we've just kind of gotten used to this new schedule, if it does play out the way we assume it's going to, I think at that point in time, we may almost forget who the permanent opponents even are because there'll only be 3 of them. If it's a 9-game conference slate, there'll be 6 non-permanents, and you're playing every team in the league every other year. So the idea that one schedule is going to be way harder, one schedule is going to be way easier, I think for the most part, we're going to notice a lot more balance overall in the SEC schedule because the scheduling is not going to be as influenced by one division being way better or worse than the other. And back in the 90s, it seems like the East was always better than the West. Last decade or so, it seems like the West has been way better than the East. We won't be as influenced by the imbalance of the divisions moving forward. I think Smart's point on that is probably a pretty good one. But on the idea of a schedule being slightly easier, slightly worse, hey, choose your fighter here. Who do you want? Do you want Nick Saban, who, he just was. He was whining the other day about an Auburn, Tennessee, Alabama, LSU as permanent opponents, even though for the most part in his career, he's beaten those teams year after year after year. From a Crimson Tide fan, it makes me concerned. Hold on, what does Saban know that we don't if all of a sudden these are tough games in his mind now, given the fact they really haven't been tough games since he's been here going back to 2007? No such whining from Kirby Smart, who says, hey, just tell me who to play. We'll show up and be ready to play the game. I don't mind telling you that the mindset that would seem to serve you better is what Kirby says there as opposed to what we've heard Nick Saban say in the past on that. And I guess one more final point I'll give to you here, and at this point you probably don't need me to tell you this, but nonetheless, in that particular clip, Smart being given the chance to kind of push back on we'll see what the league decides to do. He doesn't choose to do that. It really seems like he's operating on the assumption that it's going to be a 9-game slate, and the idea of choosing the 3 permanent opponents, he certainly doesn't push back on that being the way this is going to go, which kind of coincides with a lot of the whispers and the leaks and the reporting that's out there. The SEC will have its spring meetings coming up in Destin, Florida in May, generally kind of, I guess, sort of mid to late May is when that typically takes place. I am not a part of the Coastal Elite media that typically attends that, so I don't know exactly when it is. But the other Coastals will be there, and they will hear, at the time, I believe, the official announcement from the SEC about that schedule. I think they would have liked to have made an announcement about this a year ago. Schools like Kentucky, I think, pushed back enough that they didn't feel like they had enough, unanimity with their agreement to be able to do that. But this year, I believe that announcement's going to come out. So in the next, 6 weeks or so, we're going to, I think, hear officially about what the SEC schedule is going to look like in 2024. I believe it's going to be a 9-game conference slate. I believe it'll be 3 permanent opponents. And it sounds like, as of late, the thought of, well, maybe Georgia will play South Carolina every year. Maybe it sounds like it's trending more towards a Kentucky or somebody like that to go along with the 2 rivals, Florida and Auburn. Kirby Smart last night, though, kind of giving some more life to that as a possibility, and also essentially saying, hey, just tell us who to play. We're going to line up and beat them, whoever it is. That's a mindset that seems to serve the Dogs pretty well. All right, so on tomorrow's show, I'm going to talk about a couple of visitors who made their way to Georgia practice this week. And no, I'm not talking about Georgia Tech coach Jeff Collins, who was seen at Georgia practice yesterday, the first real football he's seen in years. But I did notice that this week, Sony Michel and Nick Chubb were back at UGA practice again. Dale McGee sharing this on Twitter. In fact, I like this, and I'm going to make this our golden shoe winner for today. Dale McGee saying, it was awesome having, and he uses the Twitter accounts for Sony Michel and Nick Chubb back at the building today. He says, RBU is not just a hashtag, we're a family. That is really good stuff there. Smiles all the way around, and you talk about the success that Georgia's enjoying right now. 2 guys that were the bedrock foundation for that, what Chubb and Michel did coming back to Georgia for 2017. I think in a lot of ways made all this possible. So we're going to some running back stuff tomorrow. Kind of a fun thing to do on a Friday. Great photo there. Golden shoe to be had. Let me tell you, who does not have photographs like that? That's those lousy, stinking Gators. They have no such recent history, anyway, to lean back on. And 219 days from right now, more bad news for them. It is a beatdown coming at the hands of the Dogs. That is our Gator Hater Countdown. It was great to be back here with you today. We'll see you tomorrow. DawgNation Daily, presented by Meriwether and Tharp. And on video. Time now for the R.S. Andrews Cool Down. R.S. Andrews, the one you turn to for your air conditioning, heating, plumbing, and electric needs. Now, after a few days in which, I know we didn't have a show yesterday, we had very few comments on Tuesday, we're going to kind of stretch our legs here a little bit today and do some more comments. Now, I can't go to like noon because, people want to go home who help us do the show, but we can hang out here for a little bit, and I'll try to make that a possibility. So whatever you want to discuss, we will do that here right now. Motivated, dedicated, calls them the Gainesville Geckos, which is very fun. Let's see what else. UGA boy for life Brunetti says, I don't care who we play. All these teams are probably happy when they see no Georgia on their schedule. Yeah, that's sort of the thing right now. It's like you consider your SEC schedule a win if you don't see the Dogs, or at least you consider it a positive, I should say, if you don't see the Dogs. But, listen, the closer we get to all of this, I guess I do get slightly more excited about it because I do think it's going to create better home schedules for Georgia. You're playing more teams more frequently. And while I always kind of like the division makeup, I like the idea of winning the East and playing for the SEC. I think one of the negative byproducts to this change we're about to see is I believe the conversation about who's playing for the SEC championship is going to get a little bit more complicated. If you follow like Big 12 this year, Pac-12 this year, as someone who likes college football and tries to follow it as closely as I possibly can, it's a little bit confusing. Scenarios and tiebreakers and things like that. The division conversation, I believe, was a little bit more streamlined. So there'll probably be some unintended consequences to this. But for the most part, right now, I find myself getting more excited about just how cool these schedules are going to look and the fact that you're going to be seeing a lot of good teams cycling through a lot more frequently, kind of keeping the schedule a bit fresh. I can certainly understand why people are excited about that. B2B Visor says Bobo's going to run that power I formation with Branson as fullback. I don't know. DMar42, thank you for the kind words. Appreciate that. Guatemala Mike there as well. Thank you so much. Frank Patterson says he thinks Branson Robinson looks a little bit bigger in those practice photos. That's a big dude, no doubt about that. Let's see what else. DMar42 says I came off the top rope on Jeff Collins. I mean, listen, Collins was former Florida defensive coordinator. He's been around the block a little bit. like even if they hired him as an analyst, I probably wouldn't care. I'd be fine with it. It'd be funny just because it's Jeff Collins. But if they hired him as an analyst, I'd be fine with it. I know some people are like, I don't want anything to do with this whatsoever because they think of Collins as a total clown. But like I think Collins' issues probably relate to leadership deficiencies more so than football knowledge deficiencies. And obviously, a place like Georgia, he would never be in a position of leadership. He's also probably just hanging out watching practice, too. Probably. Let's see what else. Let's go, Brandon. By the way, I feel like we hadn't seen Lesko in a while. Says, I'm ready to see Roderick Robinson crush defense. Hey, we have to wait so long to see him start, or do we? We're going to talk running back tomorrow. Let's go. That's an interesting thing to consider. Frank Patterson says the former OCs we hired are good recruiters, which is always really valuable. Also, B2B, I think it was him that told me the fullback thing. He said it was just joking. Yeah, B2B Visor said I was just joking. But while I don't think that Branson Robinson be a fullback, listen, if Georgia ran some fullback, I wouldn't mind it. I really wouldn't. And that's one of those things that Kirby's kind of always seemingly been against because he talked about that a little bit more openly when he first got here, that he didn't want to do fullback stuff. But I think the NFL teams that use fullbacks are typically pretty good teams. So while I certainly wouldn't want to see Georgia start using a bunch of scholarships on fullbacks because that doesn't seem like a great, efficiency. Putting that fullback in the game from time to time and, creating that conflict for defense, I wouldn't mind a little bit of that. Jonathan Aaron says if you had to choose one, which would it be? 100 yards each game for one receiver, 5 sacks per game, or 2 interceptions per game. I think I'd probably go 5-1-2. Now you say, well, 2 interceptions, that's 2 extra possessions, which you may be right about that. But five sacks pretty valuable. Although if you had 100 yards per game that you knew you had a receiver, you may never turn the ball over on downs in that particular case. So I guess you'd probably say 100 yards per game from a single receiver. If you could choose that, that'd probably be the most valuable. Frank Patterson says he'd take the 2 interceptions every game. I guess you can make the case for that. The reason why I lean towards the others is because, to me, it is within your power to produce more receiving yards, and it is your power to produce more pass rush. To say you're going to get you're going to be the beneficiary of 2 extra, turnovers per game, then you're having to wave a magic wand to do that. So I guess in my mind, I'm sort of canceling that out as not really a likely real scenario. Whereas, and if you really wanted to upgrade your passing attack, you could do so. And if you really wanted to upgrade your pass rushing attack, you could do so. Let's see what else. Let me go over to DawgNation.com for a minute. Dan in Arkansas says, I haven't heard much on the championship format and the tiebreakers. Are the tiebreakers the sticking point now? So hopefully you won't get too many situations. I think he's talking about playing for the SEC championship where you get deep into the tiebreakers. But I think what you could have is a scenario where you're in kind of a conversation with just a lot more teams right now. It's like, it could be one of those things where we go late into a season, let's say with Georgia, and that it's obviously good for Georgia to keep winning, but in terms of and to be fair, the NFL playoffs are a lot like this too, where there's oftentimes a lot of different scenarios that are out there, especially for wildcard teams. But it could be one of those things of going late into the year, you need to win, but in terms of who you need to lose, it may be a combination of factors that kind of benefits that. DT enjoyed the golden shoe today. Yeah, great to see Sony and Nick back here again. I think one of the things that's going to be important to me moving forward is showing proper appreciation for the non-national champion Georgia players, because now that Georgia's starting to collect more national championships, obviously 1980's got its perch, and it should. 1942 has its perch, and it should. And I've made a case that like a 1946 team ought to be recognized as a national champion. But, for the sake of conversation, 42, 80, they've got their place in history. 2021, 2022, they've got their place in history, and who knows how many more in the near future, including this upcoming season, may have that place there as well. But I don't believe that Georgia should be the kind of program that only celebrates national champions, because I think celebrating stuff is fun. And Nick Chubb, Sonny Michel ought to be celebrated. Making the first ever college football playoff in program history ought to be remembered. It ought to be celebrated. Their legacy, their history, their career ought to be remembered. I feel the same way about guys like early Mark Richt, David Pollock, David Green, Thomas Davis, guys like that were part of those, that 2002 team, John Stinchcomb, Terence Edwards, by the way, breaking the drought that had been 20 years without an SEC championship. 2002 ought to be celebrated. DJ Shockley in 2005 ought to be celebrated. Matthew Stafford, Noshawn Marino, 2007 ought to be celebrated. Now, if you want to make the case that there's a difference between the teams that were good and came close, and the teams like 2021, 2022 that actually broke through and won it, totally agree. You can draw a line and say, hey, this team is in a rarefied status that other Georgia teams are not, but you ought to make room when you're celebrating Mantle for, 2017, 2002, 2005, 2007. That's my little soapbox for the day. Randy Hall and the idea that occasionally Georgia might use that sixth offensive lineman, something we talked about the other day. I believe there's a chance they may do that some. And listen, that's not to say that Oscar Delp is going to be a deficient blocker. I don't know that I believe he will. I think that Darnell Washington may be one of the great blockers that's come through the SEC. I've said before, if Darnell wanted to be Orlando Pace, probably could be. So as a way of supplementing what Darnell used to give you, you may have to put that, offensive lineman in that, that jersey switch every now and then, which will give more chance for the referee to come on the mic and say, number blah, blah, blah is wearing number blah. You get so tired of it after a while, but you may be hearing a lot more of that around Georgia here right now. James Lawson says, you got to celebrate your non-national championships because a lot of those wins were so much fun because where we had come from. That's true. Yeah, I mean, a lot of this is a story, and it's a story told over the course of decades. And, getting close oftentimes is that springboard to getting where you want to go. And I truly don't believe that Georgia would be where it is right now if not for what those guys 2017 had done. I think that James is absolutely right about that. Let's see what else. We got a Facebook. I hadn't checked in on the Facebook side of things for today. I told you, we kind of stretch our legs here. We got some more time for some comments. So if y'all can hang out, I'll stay here and hang out with you because I feel like I owe you a little bit. Fun show tomorrow, though. We already have a lot of stuff planned already for tomorrow, it seems like. Alan Verbanchik says Facebook's blocking his post from being seen. Alan, I can report, at least on my screen, you are not shadow banned. So I don't know what you have done to get shadow banned, but in my purview here, I can see what you're putting. So maybe we're on the same shadow ban list, but right now, Alan, I am seeing what you're putting. This is my first time being over at Facebook for today. Phil Rogers says you go 15-0, they're going to be 44-1. That's a hell of a record. Yeah, that's quite a run. But also when you tack on, see, this is what makes me sick. And, you can't cry over spilled milk, but if you tack on the final games of the 2020 season, if Georgia had not lost the SEC championship to Alabama in 2021, if you could have found a way to win that game and also win all these other games and also go 15-0 this year, Georgia had set the record for the most consecutive wins in college football history. The current list is 47 games. Bud Wilkinson, back when he was Oklahoma coach, like Georgia, if not for that, SEC championship, could set the consecutive games won record for all of college football. As it stands now, we'll just have to wait a couple more years or at least another year to see that take place, but could have done that. Let's see what else. Ben Green says that Darnell's the best blocker I've ever seen. Now, yeah, I mean, honestly, and I think some folks kind of saw that video of some of the sled work he's doing at the combine where it's like, good NFL level tight ends, they're moving that, they're popping that sled, but Darnell's just moving it. He could have put that thing in his pocket and taken it home with him. I mean, he's taking that sled as a souvenir. Ben also says those early Mark Richt teams could have definitely won a championship if they had the playoff then. I'm convinced. I agree with you on that. I would have liked to have seen a tournament for the 2002 team. I mean, the ultimate national champion that year was Ohio State. Miami seemed like a very good team, but Ohio State did beat them. So you get into a tournament situation. Would I have trusted Georgia in a tournament situation like that? I honestly really would have. I really would. Now, you may say, well, that's what we'd expect you to say. Maybe that is what I expected to say. But it's no less my authentic opinion. Let's see what else. David West, thanks for being here today. Good to see you. Sonia Prescott says Georgia's 29-1 of the last 2 years without a 1,000-yard receiver. I'll take that. No doubt about that. Let's see what else. Alan Verbanchik predicting Jackson must start the first game. See, that's why Alan got shadow banned right there. Alan was wondering why he got shadow banned. That's it. It was that prediction that got him shadow banned right there. Kent Holcomb talking about some nice warm weather here, getting going here. You love that. Phil Rogers says Carson might throw for 350 yards in a game with the speed guys we have at wide receiver and tight end. Yeah, no doubt, good collection of talent here right now. No question about that. What else is going on Facebook right now? Let's see what else. Ted Long says Georgia's won 2 titles and no fullback. Yeah, I'm not saying they have to run a fullback. I'm just saying if I saw one line up occasionally, something that I guess Mike did enjoy doing when he's here before, I wouldn't hate that. I'm not anti-fullback. I'm really not. Not anti-fullback. Carter Lawson says I don't have to apologize for not staying here all day. Well, listen, I still enjoy staying here when we can and going, a nice little, stretch of time when we can. How about this? Bobby Powell checking in, looking in from Albuquerque, New Mexico. That's awesome. How much fun is that? Bobby, I hope it's nice weather out in Albuquerque here right now. We appreciate you being here. Tennille says she was shadow banned for saying things about Nick Saban. I think Tennille got flat out kicked off. Didn't you get suspended for a while? So we're just happy to know that you're back in the good graces of the big tech overlords. Let's see what else. Barry Watkins says, my friend's a dog fan who lives in Auburn. He says, this is kind of funny. I've seen him wearing an Auburn hat. He says, I'm like, dude, what's up with that? He says, listen, they tip better with the hat on DoorDash. I'm like, and he says, and Barry says no to hell with the tips. Yeah, so Barry, I got to confess something here. I feel like when it comes to taking care of you and yours, you sort of do what you need to do. So if somebody says, if I'm living in this town and I got to put this uniform on, I mean, how many coaches have we seen kind of wear, kind of weird gear over the years? Like a couple of years ago, Rick wore the tech gear on ACC Network or whatever. Honestly, if the check is big enough, I don't care about you wearing the shirt. I really don't. Now, listen, I'm going to stay true to myself. The only thing you'll ever see me wearing is the Georgia G. But if you're over there and you got one of those businesses, or jobs where people have some discretion about how much money to give you, we see this with, a lot of people waiting tables in terms of the attire they choose to wear. I guess to a certain extent, I'm like, whatever you need to do to put food on your table, I guess. To a certain extent, I'm okay with that. Although it would be quite a sign of bravery to be a delivery person of some kind and be head-to-toe Georgia gear. You imagine that? Knock on the door. You got the head-to-toe Georgia gear, national championship gear. That'd be something to say right there for sure. All right, let me go back over to YouTube for a minute. Zebulon Owen checking in, as often he does, with the family. Be interested to see how Brian Kelly gets ingratiated to his family this year. Took him to the SEC championship a year ago. Expectations high. They can be even better this year. You better believe if he beats Alabama again, he can use whatever kind of accent he wants. They'll let him do the fake Southern accent. You may have some of those folks down in Louisiana start talking about they may start talking like Brian Kelly at that point. They may start emulating his accent if he does enough winning. That's at least a possibility. Guatemala Mike says our next quarterback is going to be the one with the best processing speed. Much like your computer, Freeling could be our new blocking tight end. I mean, that wouldn't be a bad thing, potentially anyway. Would not be a bad thing. Let's see what else. DMart42 says, DMart, is this true? I didn't realize this. Do you really, you probably told me this a million times. Y'all, I have the worst memory. You live in College Station? That's amazing. He said, the Aggies don't have much to say when we're in our championship gear. Yeah. I'm guessing, there does come a point in which, you really cannot say virtually anything to Georgia right now, and that's probably a pretty good place for a fan base to be. Let's see what else. Foster Moss says the refs cheated in that 2002 national championship game. I remember that being very controversial. And that's like, it's pre-social media. The blogosphere was going crazy after the 2002 championship game. I remember that very, very well. Very controversial. DMart42 also brings up a really good point, and I think this is how you kind of frame this. I think this is absolutely correct. He says that the Rose Bowl still might be the greatest game of all time. I was at both the Peach Bowl this year and the Rose Bowl in 2017, and I'm still chasing that high when Sony turned the corner. Yeah, I do believe the Rose Bowl was a better game than the Peach Bowl. I think the Peach Bowl may have had the better viral moment. The old Ohio State kicker missing the kick as the clock struck 0 on midnight. That's one of those like wild occurrences that probably, as a social media highlight clip, probably works about as well as anything could ever work. But the 2017 Rose Bowl, I think pound for pound should probably be considered a better game. I do. I do. The games are somewhat similar, and there's a chance that maybe at one point in time I said the opposite. So let me go back and check the tapes to make sure I haven't argued both sides of this coin at some point in time. But I do, if you want to tell me that the Rose Bowl win is the single greatest game in Georgia football history, I think I'd be okay with that. It is arguably one of the best Rose Bowls of all time. And the Rose Bowl's had some really good games. I'm sure Rose Bowl folks would probably say Texas USC from 2005 might be the best Rose Bowl. And then you had the thing with what? You've had a couple of pretty good games. You had the Penn State USC game the year before, but that obviously didn't have anywhere near the same stakes as Georgia Oklahoma did. You had a big Michigan game at some point in time. I know you had Michigan Washington State was a pretty good game. But it's probably no worse than the second best Rose Bowl. That's an event that's existed for darn near centuries. Arguably the best Georgia game of all time. So if you're looking for, what piece of history does guys like Chubb, Michelle, Jake Fromm, what piece of history do they own? Not only do they make the first college football appearance in Georgia football history, they also probably won the single best game in Georgia football history there as well, too, I think. That's fair. Zebulon Owen says Ohio State, Utah Rose Bowl was also good there as well. I think that's the one I was trying to remember and couldn't remember. Frank Patterson says Chubb's long touchdown run after running over that guy in the Rose Bowl, maybe one of my favorite plays in UGA history. That's the one where Chubb was, he was basically on the ground and somehow shook all of that off and got the touchdown. There were some great highlight moments in that. So Greg Rosenberg was at both games, and he said he would give the Rose Bowl the nod over the Peach. I think that's right. Good comment, Greg. Appreciate that. Bob Collins also saying that the Rose Bowl was the better of the games. And it was also better than Indianapolis. Yeah. The national championship game in 2021 in Indianapolis at the end of the 2021 season, that's obviously an incredibly significant moment. And it was a thrilling game because Georgia, won it in the way that it did. But in terms of being a great game to the average non-Georgia fan, the Rose Bowl is a great game to anybody. The national championship against Alabama probably only considered to be great mostly for Georgia fans. So in terms of thrilling action, it probably does not rank with the Ohio State game, the Oklahoma game, the Rose and the Peach Bowl in terms of actual great game type situation. So I think you're right about that. Let's see what else. DMart42 on the subject of the Monk and the air raid system. The routes and they match up with the defense dictates where the ball is going to go most of the time. Spencer Clark says George Pickens came back, made that fantastic catch. He had a great catch for sure. George Pickens is one of those guys that I think will always kind of live with knowing that you had some great moments with, and you just sort of feel like he had so much more that he could show in a Georgia uniform. And listen, I'm grateful for everything he gave Georgia, but that's maybe in a short career, kind of a small window of football. That may be the most thrilling player that's ever come through Georgia. He really might be. DCM says, new quarterback and the new/old OC, do you think Kirby's going to force a much more conservative offense this year, more first down runs we had in the last few years of the Monken? No, I really don't think so. I think that, and I'll try to explain why I don't, and you can see if this is an effective explanation. If you look at why Todd Monken was brought in, Monken, hired prior to the 2020 season, was brought in because I think Kirby Smart knew he needed an offensive upgrade. In other words, it's not like Todd Monken was just sort of assigned to Georgia and Monken brought this offense with him. Georgia hired Monken. Kirby hired Monken because Monken was bringing this offense with him. So Kirby, I think, knew that he needed an offensive upgrade of where they were in 2019. And yet ultimately, what the Georgia offense was this last couple of years was a little bit of a blend of the kind of stuff that Kirby Smart liked and the kind of stuff that Todd Monken, we would presume, preferred. And it clearly worked out pretty well. So in terms of the ratio, and I think you do a pretty good job of kind of like sort of distilling this down to a key thing. How much are you running on early downs? Are you running every time on first down? Are you running, if you throw on first down and incomplete, are you automatically running the ball on second down? Because that's what a lot of conservative teams often will do. They will follow an incompletion with a running play almost invariably. And that's a good way to judge some of that. And my guess is from a run-pass ratio standpoint, from a, I hope explosive play standpoint, because last year, as I've pointed out before, Georgia had 98 plays of 20 or more yards on offense. Creating those explosive plays, I think the goal for Georgia, and I think the intention for Georgia with Bobo in place of Monken, is to put an offense that kind of stylistically, statistically, looks a lot like what Georgia's had the last couple of years. I think it's a really good question. Hemingway says that he thinks that Georgia could pass maybe even more because of the collection of receivers that it has. And, that could be true as well. That could be true as well. I think sometimes people don't fully appreciate how a wide receiver core can impact an offense. We think of quarterback being the thing that drives an offense, but look at how well Ohio State quarterbacks have performed while in college, oftentimes not performing nearly as well in the NFL. You're left to conclude, they have such a big advantage at wide receiver that creates success for the quarterback that otherwise might not exist. Tua Tagovailoa has not exactly lit the NFL world on fire either, but when he's at Alabama, he had Jalen Waddle and Jerry Jeudy and Devontae Smith and Henry Ruggs, and that great collection of wide receivers influenced the Alabama quarterback too. I don't quite believe Georgia's got that level of wide receiver play right now, but on paper it would appear to be a better crop of wide receivers than we've maybe gotten used to seeing at UGA. And as Hemingway, the commenter, points out, that could go a long way in kind of influencing the kind of offensive style Georgia prefers here this year. Philip Jordan Wells says Ernest Hemingway's in the comments. Yeah, we got quite a literary heavyweight, literary heavyweights in our comment section. All right, let's see what else. Georgia and Olive says the Rose Bowl was great because the win was the result of something that Georgia did, not the result of something the opponent did not do, like the Peach Bowl. I get what you're saying. I totally understand that. I don't view the Peach Bowl, though, as a game in which Ohio State lost more so than Georgia won. Yes, the final play of the game was a missed kick, but Georgia marching down the field, taking the lead, taking control in the fourth quarter, I believe caused Ohio State to wilt. I believe then they settled for a field goal that was maybe a little longer than they should have tried for, and then the kicker missing it makes the great viral moment. But ultimately, Ohio State, I believe, did not lose the Peach Bowl because their kicker missed a kick. It lost the Peach Bowl because it let Georgia take over the game in the fourth quarter, and Ohio State simply just folded the tents at that point in time. I think we're probably saying some version of the same thing, and I understand what it is that you are saying, but my explanation for the Peach Bowl would be a little bit different than that. Well, let us see what else. Kent Holcomb is talking about 19 years being alcohol-free. He says it's funny now being clear-headed watching some of these games. I sort of feel the same way, not to make light of, obviously, what can be for some people a very serious topic, but, obviously when you're going to tailgates and things like that, you are, oftentimes a lot of people are having a very good time, and for some people, having a good time includes a little bit of a beverage prior to the game, and so that clearly influences the way that some people think about college football because they are very involved in the tailgate scene prior to the start of the game. Well, when you do what I do for a living, you're working. Saturdays in the fall is a work day for me, so I'm sober as a judge. And it's always very interesting to kind of be at these games, watch the games, interacting with some Georgia fans, and their experience is kind of influenced by the tailgating scene they're a part of. And to be as our Kent said, the kind of clear-eyed person in all of this sometimes can be very interesting. William Perry says, my knees buckled and I wept in the stands at the Rose Bowl when Sony Michel scored. I don't think anything will ever match that feeling. That's also a pretty good description there as well, William, is that the sheer emotion of the Michel touchdown was really, really something very special. And I used the word surreal a little earlier. I guess that also at one point was surreal because I'll be honest with you. There was an element of me, and some of y'all are, you shouldn't be this way. Well, I'm just being honest. There was an element of me that going out to Pasadena, being in the Rose Bowl, being in the college football playoff, there was an element of me that was just sort of happy to be there. I had to be honest with you. And you never want the team, they were just happy to be there. They weren't, but for me, there was a little bit of an element of, I'm just sort of happy to be there because this was Kirby Smart's second year. It was not on my, radar necessarily. I thought that Georgia had a chance to be a good team, but not necessarily on my radar that Georgia would be doing so much in Kirby Smart's second year. I may have made a prediction of some, effect like that prior to the start of the season, but still, to see it play out the way that it did, still felt like a surprise, even if you felt like it was a possibility prior to the start of the year. And so to win the SEC championship in my lifetime, that'd been kind of the definition of a good season. And to go to the college football playoff, being out in Pasadena for the Rose Bowl, a game I'd watched on TV my entire life and just sort of assumed I'd never attend. You get out there in Pasadena, it's beautiful. It just sort of, I was like, hey, this is sort of cool. Georgia kind of got a chance to come out to Pasadena, and I certainly wasn't viewing that stretch from January 1st, 2018 until, whatever happened after that as national championship or bust. I wasn't. When Baker Mayfield got on that field, started doing some of the antics that he did, that started to change things a little bit. All of a sudden now you're like, who is this idiot? Who's this guy think he is strutting around this field like this? And all of a sudden now you're getting a little bit more fired up. And then as Georgia's making its comeback, all of a sudden now you are fully invested. And at least I'm speaking for myself here, fully invested in what can be the case here on all of this. And to go back to William's point, so then when you finally get to overtime and you get the great drama playing out and, finally it's the Sony Michel touchdown, then all of a sudden all the reality of this just comes rushing to you at once of, oh my gosh, we just sat here and watched or stood here and watched Georgia win one of the greatest games that's ever been played. And that was a knee-buckling type emotion. I think that's a good way to describe that. Barry Watkins says, I live in Alabama. Trust me, some of these judges aren't sober, which is very funny, Barry. Very funny for sure. All right. Now, we've done pretty good comment-wise today, so I'm going to take one more trip around all the various platforms. I'll get ready to say goodbye after that. Guatemala Mike says, y'all got me pumped about the Rose Bowl. Now I want to go back and rewatch it for the 50th time. Yeah, I think it's probably pretty good. Frank Patterson also mentioned the other thing about the Rose Bowl works really, really well as kind of a movie-style narrative structure where, the good guy is almost completely defeated at the beginning. Georgia's down, 17 points. Makes a little bit of a comeback right there to start at the end of the first half. Gave you some hope, and then it's a real battle where Oklahoma reemerges, and then Georgia kind of reemerges, and now you're kind of down to the wire. If you scripted a football game, if football was scripted like pro wrestling is, that'd be about the best script for a football game you could have. Of the villain in our eyes, Oklahoma, they really emerge at the beginning. Georgia doesn't quit, and then the fight is on, and finally, good overcomes evil. That was great. Ducati Tech also says, my belief is that Kirby Smart is the most giftable coach in college football. And the boom, thing that he says there on that at the very end of that game, it's about as giftable as he's been. I think that's exactly right. Let's see what else. Jonathan Aaron also asked about whether or not Rudiger is part of Brian Kelly's family. Yeah, he very well might be. That's pretty funny. Very well might be. Let's see what else. Let's see what else. Spencer Clark said Lavoisier Carroll retired from football. Is that really what I know? He had kind of stepped away from South Carolina after having transferred over there. Did he step away from football altogether? That's a guy that certainly had a lot of talent when he came out of high school, for sure. Really on either side of the ball. What else? Paul Moon mentioning that Pickens is a bad dude at the NFL level. He really is. Really is. Bad dude for sure. So Frank said he had some knee injuries. I hate that for Lavoisier, man. I hate that. Thank you, D-Mark. Mike there as well. Boy, I hate that. Foster Moss also mentioning, Kirby is only slightly older than I am. And, it still feels like we're relatively new into the Kirby Smart career, although, 2016 starts to feel like a while ago. I was doing this thing the other day. Oh, it was the day we talked about the analysts and the analyst hires. I was going back like way into the past when Kirby was putting his first staff together, and I was watching some like very old videos. Back then, DawgNation had not published all these videos on YouTube, things like that. So just kind of watching some of the stuff that was out there. Man, Kirby Smart looked young. And listen, I also looked very young too in 2016 compared to the way I look now. This is not unique to Kirby. It's true for all of us, but gosh, you go back and watch some of those early, very beginning Kirby Smart press conferences. Now there's a million people doing this on video. Back then there weren't tons of people doing it on video. But my gosh, Kirby looks so young in some of those videos. Wow, did he look young. All right, last comments, DawgNation.com. Brer Double Dog also says that we must know different judges if I think of judges as being sober, which is very funny. Randy asking if I'm ready to predict Texas ATM's record. I don't know if I'm ready to predict anyone's record as of yet, and I totally acknowledge this. Listen, the one thing you can't say about me is I may be a blowhard who shouts a bunch of hot takes into a microphone, but I take my medicine when I get things wrong. And so, the one thing that I fully understand is I don't have any credibility with any of y'all when it comes to Texas A&M. I do realize that because I have talked them up, and my talk up of A&M has not turned out to be true. So I realize that I don't have tons of credibility on the A&M front, but I do think there's a chance they're a good bit better this year than they were last year. So we'll see about making predictions for everybody at some point in time. Let's see what else. Let's see what else. Back on Facebook, and we'll wrap up over here. Adrian Eccles says the offense is going to be dangerous. All caps for dangerous. I like that. Bill Sanders says Tyler Simmons still onside. No problem with that either. I like that there as well. Georgia and Olive says this past year's Georgia-Ohio State game was for the national championship, and it was. And I was talking to somebody about this yesterday. It's like you're at a funeral, and, people, you got to have something to kind of lighten the mood. So people invariably seem to want to talk about college football in situations like that. We're talking about this, my belief is that over the course of the season, I don't care how good Georgia was, and last year Georgia was clearly college football's best team, but I don't care how good Georgia was, they were likely to face a test at some point. Now you can say, well, about Missouri, that was the test. So maybe they were likely to face two tests at some point. But it just never seemed likely to me that Georgia could go through an entire season without having to lay it on the line against somebody, and it turned out to be Ohio State. So as Georgia says, that kind of turned out to be the national championship game. If you really think about it, almost every national champion, you got to prove it at some point in time. You got to go out there and you got to win a game at some point in time where you're just getting the best at from somebody else. And C.J. Stroud, I think, as I said off the top of the program, I got no love for Ryan Day whatsoever, but I'll take my hat off to C.J. Stroud. I don't have any beef with him at all. He gave it to Georgia that day. He gave Georgia all it wanted, and so at some point in time, someone's going to do that to you, and so what do you do in response to that? And that's what Georgia was able to do. So there was a test. Ohio State fans have been patting themselves on the back for having kept it close. We'll congratulate them on that, but Georgia emerged from the test as national champion. And in 2023, Georgia may be the overwhelming favorite, likely will be in every single game that it plays, including, likely, I believe, going to the college football playoff. But somebody's going to test them at some point in time. That's just the way college ball works. And so much the same way that Georgia had to rise to the occasion when it needed to against Ohio State, it's going to have to rise to the occasion against somebody else there as well. And it may not be the last game, and it may not be, easy to predict when it will be. But at some point in time, if Georgia really is going to go for 3-23, they're going to have to go through somebody in a tough game at some point in time to likely get there. So we'll leave it at that for today. Thanks for being here. And of course, you can check out the Atlanta Journal-Constitution online, ajc.com. Sweet 16 action getting back going tonight. AJC's got some coverage of that for you. Also, Hawks are pretty bad right now, so you can find out if Quinn Snyder's got anything he can do to improve that as he gets going here. I'll also mention this, and I'm sure you can read about this at ajc.com there as well. So my good friend I.J. Rosenberg, who's a big part of what goes on at Score Atlanta, he had a great press conference the other day in concert with the Corky Kell Classic. Of course, our friend Kaylee Manziel, a big part of that there as well. Really happy to know that legendary former coach Dave Hunter, who's a big part of what we do with high school football, is now going to have his name attached to the Corky Kell Classic moving forward there as well. This is a much-deserved honor because, honestly, Dave's as committed to high school football now as he's ever been. And, you may not see a lot of that for those of you who care about high school football because you don't see him on the sidelines at Brookwood anymore. But in terms of constructing a lot of these TV matchups and creating these events, man, Dave's right there in the middle of it. And, my partner on these games, Rusty Manziel, tell you nobody tells better stories. No one has dedicated more of their life than Dave Hunter has. And so I'm so proud of this. Would love to have been there in person myself this other day. Obviously, with my wife's family, we've had a lot going on here this week. Was not able to do that. But, man, what a time that was. And what an awesome honor that is for Dave Hunter. I'm so proud about that. I'm sure you'll be able to read plenty about that at ajc.com. Also, more information coming out about our High School Football Hall of Fame here coming up really soon there as well. Still kind of trying to figure out what's going on with this Braves shortstop situation. We're still trying to figure this out. That's been controversial there as well. So you can read more about that. Justin does a great job covering the Braves there for ajc.com there as well. All right. R.S. Andrews, too. They make this part of the show possible. R.S. Andrews Cool Down. R.S. Andrews, find them online, rsandrews.com. It's going to be warm today, I believe. Spring is essentially here, so go ahead and get that air conditioning unit tuned back up to factory fresh specs. You can. Find them online, rsandrews.com. They'll get you tuned back up, factory fresh specs, keep you nice and cool and comfortable all spring long, and it only costs you $99. So find them online at rsandrews.com. Have a great day. We'll see you back here tomorrow. Busy show for us on a Friday to close out the week. DawgNation Daily, presented by Meriwether and Tharp. We'll look forward to talking to you then.